everyone, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I am going to hopefully be teaching you some crawl stitch today. I'm showing you how to do crawl, which is circular right angle weave, which is a basic stitch. It's a good one to know. A lot of patterns call for it, and I realized I've never done a video actually learning and teaching the crawl stitch, so I thought I'd do one for you today. This is going to be using some different materials, and I'm going to show you kind of the different effects that go into the different size beads that you use when you're learning crawl. If you need any of these materials to do this crawl bangle, you can go to the left-hand side here. We'll do a little drop down for you to click on links to purchase from me online, or to make a list to take to your local Potomac Bead Company store as well. For this circular right angle weave, I am going to be using 3mm check glass beads as well as 8/0 seed beads. The right angle weave is based on groups of 4, and it is creating basically a box that each little set of 4 runs in a line, and I'll be doing it in groups of 4. This here is a crawl stitch using delicas to show that little kind of perfectionist box, versus the crawl stitch using the 3mm, which we're going to be using. The 3mm seed bead, or the 3mm fire polished rounds, I have chosen to use a couple different colors as well as finishes and effects. The one that stands out and the one that I use the most, I used 2 strands, or a strand and a little bit of the 3mm in that pink opal color, and that's a 3mm fire polished round. Also in the 3mm fire polished round, I did use the heavy metal in the dark sienna color. And then that same kind of coloring that's just a little bit off, that has a little bit less of a red tint, I used the 3mm smooth round in the jet bronze color. For both the jet bronze and the dark sienna, I did use almost 1 strand exactly for my bracelet. I had a couple beads left over, but I kind of spaced it out based on the materials that I had and just doing a random design on the bracelet. The last 3mm check glass bead that I used was actually a glass pearl, the check glass pearl, and this is the pretty champagne-y coffee color here. In addition to those 4 different check glass beads, I also am throwing in some 8/0 seed beads. The 8/0 seed beads that we're going to work with, we're working with 2 brands just to see the difference too in size. The one brand that we're going to be working with is 8/0 seed beads in the Toho Perma Finish, and this is the pretty rose gold color. I really love this Toho color. The Toho bead is going to be slightly larger than the Miyuki seed bead, also in the 8/0. We're going to use both in the bracelet and have those 2 different beads and finishes. For the Miyuki seed bead, we are using the Picasso Olivine, which is a transparent, pretty green Picasso finish. Those 2 seed beads that I'm going to be using to make, you're really only going to use about 1.5 grams to 2 grams of the seed beads. We sell them in 9-gram tubes, so I used colors that I know that I really like. You'll also have enough that if you wanted to do another bracelet with just some of those seed beads or those some extra little check glass that you have, like I said, you can really kind of design it, do crazy patterns, and make it your own, so you'll have some extra beads there as well. Again, the check glass, I just used 1 strand of each, except for the pink there, that little pink opal. I did cut apart a 2nd strand, and then the seed beads, just a couple grams each. The whole project I'm going to string together with some green Wildfire beading thread. Using this with the 11/0s as well to show that effect. You can see that there's green showing between the beads, and then on this one here, because I did use some green beads and they're larger, you don't see as much of that green thread. The circular right angle weave, that crawl stitch, does take a lot of thread, so you're going to be using approximately 14 feet or so of your thread, although when I start to work on it, I tell you to cut about a 5-foot section. On that thread, we're going to put a needle, and this is a size 10 English beading needle. You can use a 10, 11, a 12, and the green 0.006. If you wanted to, you could also use 0.008 with this. You'll have enough room since we are using larger beads. In addition to that, I have handy my thread zap 2, which is going to be used to burn my thread ends down as well as to cut my thread off my spool. And then I also have a pliers sitting handy to flatten out the end of my thread. Since it is conditioned, it can ball up a little bit when you burn it. You can flatten that out and it's going to make it much easier for you to put the thread into the hole of the needle. I'm also working on a bead on it board here. This happens to be an 8x11 board and in the poppy color. And you want a workable surface, whether or not it's the bead on it board or just a bead mat. Have a nice workable surface to get ready to create. We're going to lay out all of our beads, cut apart our strands, and get ready to create this awesome little crawl bangle. So as I said before, if you don't already know right angle weave, it's going to make it really hard to learn the circular or crawl, the circular right angle weave. So if you want to, you can take a break from this video, watch the right angle weave video, and then you can come back and learn this crawl design. I have a little chart here for you to kind of conceptually think of this in a flat surface, even though we are going to be rounding it out. Each unit of right angle weave has potentially 4 beads. It's based on a set of 4. Each little unit here in my blue, there are 4 beads, and I'm always connecting to one of the other beads that I put on there. Adding 3 more beads, I connect then, add 3 more beads, I connect, add 1 bead, circle back to the other side, connect into the other bead, and continue. As you do additional rows and kind of go around in the right angle weave, you are going to be adding a fewer amount. So initially we add 4 beads to start, and then 3 at each section until our last 4th group we add 2. So the pattern would be 4, 3, 3, 2. As we progress, the pattern for the second row as we continue to build the right angle weave is going to be 3, and we already have that one there, so 2, 2, and then I colored this one in here because we only add 1. So that's going to be our constant pattern, is that 4, 3, 3, 2 to start out, and then after that all you need to remember is the 3, 2, 2, 1 pattern. And we'll go over that and kind of show you here with the actual delicate beads, because you can really see kind of those cubes taking effect and how that looks when the delicas are used. It's almost squared off. And these are the 11-0 delicas, so ours will be bigger obviously when we are working with these bigger 3mm and 8-0 seed beads. To start out and to kind of keep that in mind here, I'll just tuck it off to the side as we look at our units. I have in my hand about 5 feet of thread. Anything more than that, it's going to be too much to work with. You're going to get tangled and confused. I like to add thread, and I recommend adding thread rather than starting off with too much thread. Because it is a bangle, we'll be able to pretty much conceal pretty well where the different thread is actually tied off. On the base of my thread, I have a stop bead. This is a bead that is not in my project, but is there to stop the beads as I'm working with them from falling off the bottom of the thread. To add the stop bead, I'm sewing through that bead 2 times, which is going to put 2 pieces of thread on the exterior part. I like to use a bead that's not in my project, so I make sure that I'm not by accident mixing it together. Because of the nice bright color, I'm going to begin my design here with my gold beads. So again, right angle weave is based on a series of 4, which we're going to use these 4 beads to make a little square. I put 4 beads on my needle and drop them down next to that stop bead. We're then going to start the right angle by sewing through those first 2 seed beads. And I'm sewing with the needle going away from the stop bead. That's going to round this out and create my first little squared unit. To join on to this and to add more beads, I'm going to add 3 beads, because initially again we add our 4 beads, then we're going to add 3 beads. With the thread coming out of that 8-0 seed bead right there, we're going to sew back into that seed bead after adding our 3 beads, pull the thread, and create our second little square there. To continue to be able to add more squares, we're going to sew through the next 2 beads. That's going to take us out so that we're on that right hand bead. If you notice, the previous time the thread was coming out the bottom of that right hand bead, now it's coming out the top of that right hand bead. If you draw in your mind the thread and trace the thread course, it's just a series of figure 8s. For our third right angle unit, we're going to add 3 beads again, sewing again into the opposite side of where the thread is coming out on that right hand bead, and then sewing down 2 beads. My thread is still coming out that base or that right hand bead, and now I'm again at the bottom of the thread. Here's where circular right angle weave can get a little tricky. So I have my 3 groups of 4 here, which I added 4 beads to start to get my first group of 4, and then 3 in each one after. To connect my sides to add my 4th unit, I'm only going to be adding 2 beads. To add those 2 beads, I'm going to add 1 bead, which is going to be my bottom bead right here along the side, and then I'm going to sew up through the bead on the opposite side. When I'm coming out of that opposite bead, I'm not going to pull the thread tight so you can kind of see what's happening. I'm going to add 1 more of my gold bead and then sew down through that right hand bead. When I pull the thread then, my project is going to come around in a circle. And that's going to get my 4th unit then of my right angle weave kind of together. So I have my 4th unit there with my group of 4 beads. And what I'm going to do then is connect it basically and get ready to step up so that way I can add my next group of 4. When you're holding the right angle weave, your thread is going to be coming out towards the top of one of your right angle units. What you want to do is turn your project so that way, making sure that the stop bead is kind of towards the base, and you should appear that you have 4 beads there kind of at the top of the right angle unit. These are going to be those 4 beads that are sitting right along the top. What I want to do is get my thread to come out one of those 4 beads. I'm going to sew along the top row of that bead there. And when I'm coming out the top of one of those 4 beads, I'm going to get ready to add my next circular units. For my next circular units here, I'm going to be adding the 3 beads, then groups of 2. So I'm going to add those 3 there, then the 2 on the side, then the 2 on the side, and then just 1. We're going to be adding those to those kind of 4 top beads. So if you see my diagram here, it'll actually be, this will be the top beads, that's going to be the bottom as we continue to grow. So I'm going to be adding those onto the 4 top beads as we grow and make this bangle longer. So when I'm coming out that top bead here, and I have those 4 other beads kind of sitting along, you have that 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to all be sitting with the hole going right to left rather than up and down. So you shouldn't see their holes. That's a little hint too. So I'm going to switch colors just so you can see which beads and how many beads we're adding. This is that Picasso. I'm going to add 3 beads when I'm coming out the side of one of those top beads. And just like we did before, sew in to the bead at the opposite end of where the thread is coming out. 3 beads then get added. And I'm going to sew up through the first of those 3 beads that I added. My thread then is going to be coming out the side of one of those units of 3. Now I need to add 2 beads. To add my 2 beads, I'm going to add 2 onto my needle, and we're going to make our next unit connected to the next right angle weave bead that's sticking up at the top. I know that I'm going to sew into this opposite side here because I want my thread in a figure 8 and to go in a circle. If I sew in here, those beads are going to sit funky on the side. If I sew in this direction, I'm going to complete that circle that my thread is already going by continuing it around. Sewing in that bead there, you can see that group of 4 beads right there that wants to be closed and wants to complete a circle. I'm going to sew back up through the bead that my thread was coming out of, as well as the bead at the top to complete my right angle unit. Because I am doing the circular right angle weave, I also need to get into the position to add my next group of 3 beads. To do so, or I'm sorry, my next group of 2 beads. To do so, I need to get my thread and needle so that it's coming out my next base strand. So through the 3rd bead that you add, or that 3rd Picasso bead, and also through your gold bead. You can see here it doesn't want to sit in a circle. You can see these 4 groupings of 4 beads. You have your first group there, and then your second group of 4 beads, and we're ready to start our 3rd group. Again, add 2 of our Picasso. We're going to borrow the 1 bead from the previous raw group and sew down that bead. We're also going to sew through that gold bead and come out right there. Because we want to come out on the side, I'm also going to sew out the first Picasso bead there. So you can see here on the side, before it's rounded out and connected, we have 3 right angle units. We have that unit of 4 right here with that 1 gold bead at the bottom, the second with the gold bead at the bottom, and then the 3rd one that we just created with the bead at the bottom. To do our final one, we are going to actually only be needing to add 1 bead. That's because we already have those 2 beads connected. I have the 1 gold one at the top, and then I have, here we'll flip it this way so you can see it. I have that 1 gold one at the top, and then I also have the one on the side. I'm going to be connecting into the one from the previous side here, so I only need to add my 1 bead. Adding 1 bead onto my thread, I'm going to connect the corners here to add my right angle unit. I sew through the side, through my gold bead, and up through those 2 beads. So that way I'm ending at the top of one of my right angle units. When I pull tight now, you can see that right angle unit kind of taking place. You have the groups of 3 with those 4 beads, like I said, that you don't see the holes. They're going to be laying right to left here. Those 4 beads sitting right at the top because we're doing 4 units of right angle weave. For my next grouping, we are going to do the same thing, and it just keeps getting longer and longer. So my bead at the top here with my thread ending at one of my top 4 beads, and if you kind of pinch it, those top 4 beads will lay nice and upright for you. With a thread coming out of one of those 4 beads, I'm going to start my next right angle unit. To start your next unit, you're going to start with 3 beads, and I picked up that bronze bead. I'm going to sew through that previous seed bead already there that my thread was coming out of, and I'm sewing in a round because for circular weave, that right angle, you're always going in a circle. To connect to the next side, I'm going to sew through 1 of those bronze beads, and now I add everything in groups of 2. So 2 bronze beads go on. My thread is coming out towards the top of one of those bronze beads. Sew into one of the Picasso to add your next right angle unit. Sew through that bronze bead again to close up that circle and to pull the thread nice and tight. And we want to get the whole way over to this next right angle unit. So you're going to sew through those bronze beads that you just added. And to start my circle and add those 2 beads on the side here, I'm going to sew through that Picasso bead on the base row, because you never want to see the thread going straight across from one bead to another. You always want to see it in the circle. I'm going to add my 3rd right angle weave here, which is going to be 2 more of that bronze. Sew into the bronze bead. That puts 2 more onto that same unit. sew through the Picasso bead again, and then we're going to sew through the bronze bead so that I'm coming out towards the top. And here's where I'm going to add my last bead, which is just going to be one bead because I'm connecting the two sides together. Adding one bead, and I'm going to sew into the bronze and into the Picasso bead, into that bronze bead to finish up that right angle unit. And then in order to step up to add my next color, sew through that top bronze bead. Now when you see it here with the rounds, you can really see those right angle units with those four beads sitting ready to add your next grouping. Again, to add the next grouping, we're going to start out here by adding 3 beads, and I'll do that pink opal color. Sew back in from the opposite end through that same bead that you're coming out of. That gets you your first group of 4. In order to connect to the other bead there at the top, sew through your first opal bead that you added, add 2 more of that pink opal, sew through that jet bronze bead there, so that way you're coming towards the unit. That's going to add those beads on the side. Now we need to get our thread back over to the opposite side, so you're going to sew through that pink bead that was on the side that you were coming out of, sew through the pink bead at the top, and we're going to start our right angle unit here by sewing the next one by sewing through the pink bead and the bronze bead, and then already having 2 beads to that right angle unit, I know I just need to add 2 more. So 2 more of those pink beads go on, sewing back through the pink opal and that bronze again to finish that group of 4. And then when I'm coming out the end, I want to sew up the opal and connect them together by adding 1 more of my opal beads. Sew that one last opal bead in, so that way it sits right in the middle at the top and creates that last group of 4 unit. Go ahead then and sew through the bronze to close up that unit of 4, and sew through the next 2 beads in order to get your thread and needle to the top. That's going to be your next right angle unit. So you can see the fun effect that the color is having when you change up the color and actually have the different kind of sets going along. You can see the progression of the right angle beads. You're always going to see a set of 3 because you're connecting to the beads from the previous row. As I go in again and add more, and you can pick them up in a completely random order, it doesn't really matter which beads you use next. I'm going to use my gold again. I pick up 3 beads, and I'm going to sew through, coming around in a circle, that first, whoops, picked up 4. Sew through that first pink opal. That gets me my first group of 4. And I'm going to sew up that side bead so I can start adding to my next group. Add 2 more beads, so we started with 3, and then we add 2. And a little knot there that will get out. I added those 2 and sewed through the opal, sew through the gold to finish up that right angle unit, and then in order to progress and get to the next unit, I'm going to sew through the top gold, the side gold, and also, because I'm starting that next unit, through the pink. So we're always going in circles. 2 more gold go on, sew through the gold and the pink that your thread is coming out of, and then up through the gold bead on the side. When my thread and needle are coming out the top there of the gold bead, you can see I have an empty space that I can add in my last bead because I already have the sides and the kind of top and bottom. I'm adding in the top because the bottom's already there. Sew in my top bead and sew through the side. sew through the bottom, sew through the right side, and then so I can add more beads, I'm going to sew through the top. So when you're looking at the raw stitch, you have the bottom, you have the top, and then you have the sides of the piece. Your thread as you step up to your next color is always going to be coming out one of the top beads. Those top beads should be, if you're looking at the piece kind of up and down and growing it, should be going horizontal that you cannot see the holes. So you can see my 4 beads right there sitting right along the top. This one included here that sit in that horizontal. Those are the beads that are always going to be the bottom of my right angle unit as I add my side beads and my top beads. Again, groups of 3 to start out. Sew through that bottom bead again, adding the top and the sides. I'm going to sew through my side bead and finish my first unit. Now I have my side bead and my bottom bead to my next unit. I add 2 beads so I can get the top and the left side in on the unit here. So into that bottom bead, adding the top and the left, sew up through the right bead, and that's going to complete that right angle unit with your side beads added in. Now your left and right and your left bead and your top added in. Sewing over to the next area, or the next unit rather, I'm going to go through the top and what was the left side of the previous unit is now going to be the right side for the next unit. I'm going to sew through that right side and the base and add again the left and the top. Sew through the right and the bottom to close up that right angle unit. To get in position to add the next bead, I'm going to spin, so what was the left that I just added is going to become the right of the next unit. So up that right of the next unit, add your top, because your right and your left and your bottom are already there from previous additions. So down the left, so through the bottom, so up through the side, and then because we know we want the bangle to progress, we're going to sew through the top bead, which is our step up to do our next row. The reason that I've gone through this in really deep detail is because it can be rather confusing for people. People can get confused easily with this crawl stitch because, again, it is kind of that circular fashion. A lot of circular stitches kind of confuse people as they're working about them, and I always tell people master it in the flat before you're going into the circular. So you want to make sure, again, you know that regular right angle weave before you go into the circular. You can now really see, as we've gone in and we've added 6 units here, you can see that effect of the squares taking place. You have your gold, and then your Picasso with your gold, your bronze with the Picasso, the pink with the bronze, the gold, and then that burgundy there going in with the gold. So I'm going to continue progressing by adding more beads, more of those 3mm and those 8 O's, getting it longer and longer in my groups of that 3, 2, 2, 1. So if you do need to kind of think about and get it more in depth, you can lay out your beads and say, okay, I know the first one is going to have 3, the second one is going to have 2, the third grouping I'm going to need 2, and the last one I'm going to need 1. That will help you if you're getting confused and you know exactly kind of where to put your needle and where to stop. I'm going to continue working along my bangle here, making it longer and adding in those colors as you also work on mastering your crawl stitch. So I've gotten to the point here where I have about 2 inches of my project here, and you can see that I'm almost out of my thread. I wanted to show you how I add thread. A lot of people add thread different ways. Some will go back and kind of sew it into the project. I'm going to show you the way that I think is quick, efficient, and easy to add thread. Remove your needle from your thread, and with your new piece of thread, tie it around the old piece of thread. So I'm not tying it into the old piece of thread. I'm literally letting the old piece of thread just hang out there, and I'm going to tie on the new piece and tie a knot. What that allows me to do is move that knot that I just created, you can see here, up and down the pre-existing thread. I'm going to give that a nice tight pull and slide it down right next to one of my beads as I'm getting ready to start my next right angle unit. Then take those 2 thread ends and simply tie them together. I'm going to tie right over left and then left over right, tying them nice and tightly together, and then going in and actually burning down the thread ends. I'm not going to cut them off completely because I want to be able to see where they are so I can go in and I can glue on later, but I'm just continuing then right from where I am, adding on the needle to my thread end, using my pliers to kind of squeeze out the little end of the thread there to make it easier to thread the needle, and then simply thread the needle and continue on with your stitch. Once you get the length long enough to create your bangle, we're actually going to seam the 2 pieces together. The way to think about your bangle and how it has to fit is that it's going to fit over the widest part of your hand. So that's going to be kind of right where your knuckles are, ending with the knuckle on your thumb. So you want to make sure when you put the bracelet around and you're measuring that you can put it around and that the ends will pretty much touch here right along the back of the smallest point, or of the biggest point. That way you know that you're going to be able to get your bangle on and not put too much tension on the thread as you pull it. One thing to also show, if you're still kind of struggling or rewinding and watching as well, when you exit the beads here, and to be able to see there, you want to make sure that at each intersection you see the 4 pieces of thread, basically 2 going into the middle bead here and 2 going into the ends, that you see that connection point, but that there's a big open kind of diamond space in the middle between each of your beads at each corner. If by any chance you see thread going straight across at all at those connection points, you know that you are doing the right angle weave incorrectly. The goal usually of the right angle weave, then, you can go back and you can add extra beads in between here. If you like, you could drop in some 11/0 seed beads. There's enough space to put an 11/0 the whole way down and seam down one, then the other, and into all 4 of the spaces that were created. I'm just simply going to keep this nice and simple since we're just learning the techniques. But if you do want to kind of step it up, or you're just watching this video to get an idea, you can go ahead and do that as well, adding in the 11s in those 4 rows. You can do that after the fact of actually completing the bracelet, even if you decide to go back and add it later, or you can do it with the leftover thread after you go ahead and seam it together. When you're getting ready to seam your project together, you're going back to that original 4 set of that right angle weave. If you want to, you can actually take those beads off, that first original, so that way you can get to that pattern again of kind of almost that little V pattern of the colors progressing. I'm going to leave it on so I know where my start portion is, and we're going to connect it to the seed beads there on the side. When I'm connecting it, we have those 4 beads that are sitting right at the top here, that 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to connect it to the 4 beads, the 4 gold beads, sitting right here on the other side. Moving the stop bead out a little bit, you can see those 4 gold beads that are hanging out right along the edge. In between those beads, we're going to need to add a bead, 2 beads basically, to each little section in order to group them together, and then 1 bead. To group them together, I also want to make sure that my line is nice and flat. So that way, because it is more of a box shape, even though I'm using rounded beads, it is a box shape, that it has that squared off shape because it's a group of 4. That being said, if you look straight down along the line, you can see all those little right angle units. You want to make sure that you can see them in a straight line and that it's not twisted at all. So when you go in to seam it up, you don't have a kink in your project anywhere or have it turned anywhere. You want to seam it from end to end. To seam the project, we're going to turn the project on itself. We're coming out of one of those top beads on the Picasso color, and we're going to line it up so that you see the gold bead on the opposite side with that same right angle unit. As I'm doing that, I'm going to grab another gold bead, and my thread's coming out towards the bottom of that bead right there, that unit. I'm going to go into the gold bead on the other side in that circular motion that we're doing the whole time on the right angle weave. Add another gold bead, so I'll have a little collection of gold here, and come back down through that Picasso bead. That's going to add in our first little right angle unit. So I'm not pulling tight, just so you can see. Next, what I'm going to do is spin the bracelet around, go through the first gold bead that I added, as well as the second gold bead from the original starting side that is facing at the top of the right angle unit. Turning your unit here, you can see then we just add one bead at a time. I have the gold bead here, the gold bead here from the start side, the gold bead that I just added, and then I have my Picasso bead on the other side here that I'm going to use to grab onto. Adding a gold bead, so through the Picasso and the gold bead that you had added previously, and that's going to close up that right angle unit. To make it nice and seamless, sew down the gold bead from the start side and sew up through the gold bead that you just added. Once I'm there, I'm rotating the bracelet slightly so that way I can add in my next gold bead. My next gold bead is going to sit at the bottom of that right angle unit. So I'm going to sew down through the aqua bead, and that'll get those 3 beads connected. I'm going to add another gold bead in place here, and then connect and add these 3 beads already by catching on to the gold bead from the start area, and that's going to add that 4th bead in place to make it nice and tight and all together. So back down through the gold and the Picasso and out the gold that you just added. To connect to the last right angle unit, kind of push the stop bead out of the way. We'll come back and kind of tie off the thread right at that stop bead. And the last kind of area here to add, all the beads are actually on. All we need to do is connect them nice and seamlessly together. So I'm going to sew around those beads that are there. So when you're joining the 2 ends together, the number counts to think of are 2, 1, 1, 0. You're adding 2 beads initially, and then you're adding 1 bead, 1 more bead, and then 0 beads with this last right angle unit. You can see I've sewn through this right angle unit a couple times just to kind of tighten that up. And then once I'm coming out this side, once I'm coming out this side of the original bead there, ending near that stop bead, I'm going to take off the stop bead, and you can see actually just kind of having that stop bead in place, you can see how nicely an 11/0 fits in between these 8s and 3 millimeters. So if you would want to add that in, I'm going to take that off and slide it off here. Once I have that stop bead off, I'm going to take the thread end as well as my long piece of thread right now and simply tie a knot. Tie a nice square knot. Right over left, left over right. And then you can see you have a seamless piece. Once we burn down the thread, you're actually not even going to be able to tell where the bangle started and ended, other than the fact that we have that grouping of gold, just so you could see that nice seamless connection between those beads. At the very end, what I'll do is take my thread burner and simply burn down the end of the thread. When you burn down then the last little tip of the thread, it actually creates a stop right next to that knot that you're not going to be able to pull off. I did have to add one more grouping of thread towards the end, and I'm going along my project now looking for those thread ends. Once I find them, burn them down a little bit so that way they get hidden in your project. You should have one more burned thread area, and I know I did it by a green bead, so it's also good to keep track of which ones you did it near. And I'll look in for that, find it and catch it, and burn that little thread end down as well. If you can't find it, not a big deal. It probably got eaten up by your project. It may come out and from hiding later on, or you won't have to worry about it at all. It's tucked in. So once you're done your bangle, all you have to do is just simply kind of roll it on your wrist. And you can see here the different kind of fit that it has. The bangles are a cool design because they really do roll on and off. You can do the bangles in all different stitches, but this was a really good way, I think, hopefully, that you could comprehend kind of the building blocks of the right angle unit and having that initial group of 4 beads and then adding in 3 beads to connect to that first initial unit, and then building off of that as well. This is one of the stitches that I think is probably the hardest stitch to attempt, so don't feel defeated by it. Definitely get back out there and look at it. When you do the beads, it's actually really easy to see with the smooth round 3 or 4 millimeter. Obviously the larger the bead, if you're doing 4 groupings like this, the bigger the circumference is going to be, but it's also going to get done quicker because the beads are bigger, so therefore it'll move a little bit faster because you have less stitches to do. At any time you can increase the amount of rows of your crawl stitch here. So if I wanted to, I could actually have made this 6 wide rather than 4 groupings wide. So going back to kind of that little picture at the start, if I wanted to, I could have actually done 6 little blocks rather than my 4 little blocks, or my 3 and then my connector. I could have had, 5 little blocks in there plus my connector, making 6. The cool thing with right angle weave is you can go in and make it any length that you want. You can go back after the fact if I wanted to, pick up some 11/0s and simply go down my line, adding in my 11/0s between each little bead to give it a little bit of a different look. You can also do patterns where it has the daisy look to it with that flower and adding a little bead around, and you can really vary the size going from bigger and smaller, which I did a little bit showing you the difference because the 8/0 seed bead is slightly smaller than the 3 millimeter bead. So hopefully if you get a chance to practice and to do your crawl stitch, you like it and you enjoy working with it, and see that you can make a fun bracelet like this with a bunch of odds and ends, slip it on as a bangle, and wear couples stacked on top of one another. You can do it all in one color. You can keep kind of going. And the bangle really, rather than giving you guys a size that I made it, is really to fit. So mine here, just to let you know, is about right just under 7 inches for the inner diameter, and that slides on my wrist nicely and then gives a little bit of play room for it to slide off the side. If you want to see other videos like this, you can always subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also join our conversations on Facebook and join our beading and jewelry making group. There we exchange ideas, answer questions, as well as share with others all of the different techniques, the different designs that people are doing. It's a really great interactive way for you to interact with other beaders that love seed beading and wire working and kind of everything in between. So it's a really fun little social group. You can also stay connected with us at PotomacBeads.com. You can also buy online from me there. If you need any of the materials, you can go back to the beginning of the video to the little drop-down menu, click on that, or right underneath the video here, we'll do a little description or a little link to all the different materials. Under the description, there's a little show more button, click on that. Also, just something to mention, a lot of people don't know when you are on our channel and you're watching a video, there's also a little magnifying glass right underneath our heading when you get to this top of the channel. If you do want to see anything else that uses some of the same materials. You can actually search there by materials as well. So I know some people say, I want to see what you can make with 3mm or other beads, or with your round duo beads. So search there as well. Just a little hint for you guys that are watching a lot of the YouTube videos. So as always, have fun mastering and kind of creating your nice crawl bangle. You can also check out your local Potomac Bead Company store, walk in there, and anything that you would need to create this bangle, you can get there as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody, and have fun learning and mastering crawl.